The restaurant was the kind of place where secrets were whispered over crystal glasses and power sat quietly in tailored suits, where money spoke softly but ruled loudly. No one in that room knew that in the corner booth, beneath the dim golden chandelier, sat Victor Romano, the most feared mafia boss in the city, watching without being noticed. He wasn't there for business. He was there for something far more dangerous, his 16-year-old son, Adrian. Adrian had begged his father for one night without bodyguards hovering like shadows. Reluctantly, Victor agreed, but he never stopped watching. Across the room, a young waitress named Elena moved swiftly between tables, balancing plates with quiet grace. She wasn't from wealth or power, she worked double shifts to support her sick mother and younger brother. Life had taught her to endure, to stay silent, to survive. But that night, silence would not be her choice. It began with laughter, loud, slurred, aggressive laughter. A drunk guest named Marcus Hale, a wealthy investor known for his temper and arrogance, stumbled toward Adrian's table after overhearing him refuse a drink. "What kind of boy refuses a toast?" Marcus sneered, grabbing Adrian's shoulder too tightly. Adrian tried to stay calm, but fear flickered in his eyes. Victor saw everything from the shadows, his jaw tightening, his men waiting for the slightest signal. But before anyone could move, Elena stepped in. Her voice was steady but firm. "Sir, please let go of him. He's clearly uncomfortable." The restaurant fell quiet. Marcus turned slowly, eyes burning with humiliation. "Do you know who I am?" he barked. Elena swallowed her fear. "It doesn't matter who you are. You're scaring him." In that moment, she didn't know the boy was the son of the most dangerous man in the city. She didn't know that powerful eyes were studying her courage. Marcus shoved her aside, but she stood her ground again, placing herself physically between him and Adrian. "You need to leave." The words were simple, but brave. Marcus raised his hand as if to strike her. Gasps echoed. And then it happened. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as Victor Romano stood up. Slowly. Deliberately. The kind of silence that follows a predator filled the air. Marcus didn't recognize him at first. But the room did. The staff did. The manager froze. Victor approached with measured steps, eyes locked on Marcus. "Remove your hand," Victor said softly. Softly, but with a weight that crushed. Marcus laughed nervously, unaware of the cliff he stood upon. "And who are you?" Victor's men had already surrounded the perimeter. Elena realized too late that this wasn't an ordinary father. Adrian looked both relieved and terrified. Victor didn't answer Marcus. Instead, he looked at Elena. For a brief second, their eyes met. She expected anger, intimidation, maybe dismissal. Instead, she saw something else, approval. Then Victor turned back to Marcus. "You raised your hand," he said quietly, "in front of my son." The blood drained from Marcus's face. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Romano," someone muttered. The name hit Marcus like a gunshot. He stumbled backward, apologizing, sweating, trembling. But Victor didn't yell. He didn't threaten. That would have been mercy. Instead, he placed a protective hand on Adrian's shoulder and said, "You should learn something tonight, son. Respect isn't demanded. It's earned." Then he nodded slightly to his men. They escorted Marcus out, not violently, not loudly, but with finality. The kind of finality that meant Marcus Hale's influence in the city had just ended. Elena stood frozen, heart racing. She expected to be fired for interfering. Instead, Victor turned to her. "You were willing to risk your job, for someone you didn't know." She didn't answer immediately. "No one deserves to be treated like that," she finally said. Simple. Honest. Brave. Victor studied her like a puzzle he hadn't expected. What's your name? Elena. You protected my son tonight, Elena. Adrian stepped forward. Thank you, he said sincerely. The sincerity in his voice surprised her. Victor reached into his coat, not for a weapon, but for a card. He placed it gently on the table. If you ever need anything, he said, call this number. The entire restaurant watched, stunned. A mafia boss offering help to a waitress? But Victor wasn't done. He leaned closer and said quietly enough that only she could hear, courage like yours is rare. And I don't forget rare things. Then he walked away with Adrian, leaving behind silence, and a future no one could predict. Elena stared at the card in her trembling hand, unaware that her life had just crossed paths with power in a way that would change everything. And if you think this was shocking, what happened next would shake the entire city. Elena didn't call the number for weeks. She tucked the card inside her locker and tried to forget the night the air changed. But life doesn't pause for fear. Her mother's hospital bills piled higher. The landlord began knocking harder. One evening, after being told her mother needed an urgent surgery they couldn't afford, Elena stared at the card for a long time. Pride wrestled with desperation. Finally, she dialed. The phone was answered on the first ring. Romano residence. Her voice almost failed her, but she forced it steady. This is Elena. There was no confusion on the other end. One moment. Minutes later, a black car pulled up outside her apartment building. No sirens. No spectacle. Just quiet efficiency. She was escorted, not to a dark office, but to a private hospital wing. Victor was already there. You wouldn't have called unless it mattered, he said calmly. She told him everything. No dramatics. Just truth. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he simply nodded. It's handled. Within hours, her mother was moved to a specialist floor. Surgery scheduled. Paid in full. Elena stared at the paperwork in disbelief. Why? She whispered. Victor's answer was something she didn't expect. Because my son hasn't stopped talking about what you did. Adrian had insisted on finding her.